Alright, next, it may look like we've taken a step back, but we're actually moving forward. Going to be taking the old scene, the first scene that we started working with, and we're just going to treat it in a little bit different way. I made a couple little changes, nothing major. I changed the material color. I've added a skylight so that we get some ambient light in there. Before it was just the key light, and the shadows were totally black. So that's gone. That's really about it. But what we're going to start looking into now is rendering the environment and the character. We'll pretend the teapot's a character in separate passes, and still combining them back together again so that it ultimately equals the same result as if they had been rendered together. So what I've done is I've set up some layers here. I've got my ground, my teapot, and my two lights, just so we can easily, turn them on and off and work in the file. So first thing, let's create our control image. So we've got single frame. I already set up an output path for it. So we'll just render everything together and we'll get our control image. So I'll do that right now. Alright, so here's the finished render. It's a little bit grainy. My skylight settings are lowered just so it goes a little bit faster. My computer is fairly old, so just trying to keep things fast, but that shouldn't matter. So here's the image we're going to try and recreate. Now, not only are we going to render these separate, but we're also going to split this up into different lighting passes. That way we're going to have control over the skylight and the key light separately for both the environment and for the teapot. So let's go ahead and we'll do that. First of all, we'll start with the background. So we'll just hide the teapot, and what we're going to need to do is turn off one of our lights. So let's first off just render let's render the skylight first. So I'm just going to turn off the key, and we'll do a render of that. Whoops, hold on. No. Don't want to be saving that. Now we'll render. Alright, so there is our glorious ambient light pass for the environment. Let's go ahead and just save that out. We'll call that env ambient. Alright, now we're going to do the exact same thing, but with just the key light. So we'll do a render of that. Alright, that one's much faster. So now this is just the key light, so we'll save that out. We'll call it environment key. Alright, now what we'll do is we're going to do the same thing, but with the teapot and not the ground. So we've got that set up. We'll render that. There's our T key, and flip these again and render. Actually, one thing we're going to need to do here is we need the ground to be there so that it blocks the light correctly on the teapot. So what we're going to do is instead just we'll select it, we'll go to its properties, and we're going to make it invisible to camera. So it's still going to be there and cast shadows onto our teapot, but it's not going to render. That's really important. So let's do that. We'll render it. Okay, so here's the result of that. Let me save that out. Now, I'll make sure I point it out now, is that if our environment pass was supposed to cast a shadow with the key light turned on onto the teapot, we would have had to do the same thing. We would have made the environment invisible to the camera and left it on for the teapot key pass. But in this case, we didn't need it. So now all we need is to get shadow passes. So let's go in, and for that we're going to need to create a matte material. So pick matte shadow, and we have receive shadows and effect alpha. So the defaults here are what we want. So we're going to assign that to the ground plane, and let's make sure that we make it visible to camera. And now what we're going to do is make the teapot invisible to camera. And let's do the key pass first. So let's go ahead and render that. Okay, so it appears to be all black. If we check the alpha, there's the shadow of our teapot. So that one's good. We'll call this T shadow. Alright. And let's go ahead and we'll jump now into Fusion. And we'll bring in our control, bring in our passes. Okay, so let's spread this out a little bit, make some room. We'll start with whatever's going to be the furthest back. So we'll start with our environment, and we'll start, after that we'll put the teapot, and the shadow is going to go right in the middle. So let's start with a merge, and what we'll do is, here's our ambient pass for the environment. We'll put the key on, and lighting passes are also going to be additive, just like speculars and reflections. All you do is you turn the alpha gain down, make it additive. So that's how you combine lighting passes together. Alright, so let's also go ahead and we'll combine these two together, and again we'll turn the alpha gain down. Alright, so there, those are additive. And now let's put the teapot over the background. And this is just a normal merge. Alright, so now we need the shadow. Now, if we look at the shadow, the teapot itself is not there, just the shadow of it. So it needs to go in between here. Now, one thing I see happen, which you should not do, is this. That's obviously not correct. If we compare, see, this shadow's only blocking the key light. It's not blocking the ambient light. So what we need to do is actually connect this here, so that all we're doing is we're blocking the key light, so that this area is black and the ambient light is left the same. So now at least the shadow of the key is correct, but we missed a pass. We still got to go back. There's 2 shadow passes that you need in order to get this to turn out right. We need a shadow pass from the skylight as well. So go back in, and we'll flip this around. All the other settings can stay exactly how they were, and we'll render that. Alright, so that render's finished now. If we check the alpha channel, we have just the shadow of the teapot from the skylight. So let's save that guy out. Let's call that contact shadow. So now we'll go back in here, bring in our new pass, and remember that needs to occlude only the ambient lighting. So there we've got this. Add the key, add the teapot, and you get the exact same result as if they had been rendered together. But now what's fun is you have control over the lighting of this scene. You can, change the light color, light intensity, whatever you want. So, if you use color corrector here, if you wanted to change the color of the key light on just the teapot, you have that control. You can do whatever you want with it now. You can make it brighter, whatever. So it's nice. It adds a lot of flexibility for lighting shots, and this is actually very much the way that things are usually set up in the projects that I work on professionally. So I highly recommend this workflow. You don't need to separate things necessarily like we were before with diffuse and lighting and all those separate passes. This pass was rendered with the specular in it already. If I had a problem with the specular in the shot, I'd probably just go in and tweak it in Max and re-render it, because it just starts to become a headache when you've got tons and tons of passes and you need to go back and make sure that you update the right ones, and then you're saving out all sorts of frames on your hard drive and taking up space. So I find that this sort of workflow actually keeps the amount of passes to a minimum, but still gives you a lot of control. Okay, so I've jumped back over to Max and I've added a little bit to our environment here. Put a box in front of the teapot, just so we can show you how to set up map materials so that we can get this to go back together properly and have the teapot, even though it's rendered separate, look like it's going behind this box. So I've just given this the same material that is on the ground. Now really, the passes are going to be handled the exact same way as we did before, but what we're going to need to do is when we render the teapot's passes, we're going to need to put a map material on the environment so that it cuts out this part of the teapot. So what we'll do is I'll select my environment, put the map material on there, and we'll just start by rendering the key pass just so you can see what it does here. So we'll render that out, and I forgot to make this guy. Whoa! Alright, my display's decided to freak out a little bit. We need to make that visible to camera. Okay. So we'll render this again, and okay, as you can see, it's now cutting that. The box is cutting the teapot, and well, I have the shadows turned on there. We'll have to turn that off too, but you can see it's cut the teapot out. So what we need to do is, in our map material, we don't want shadows right now. Okay, so there you go. That's the new key pass. So let's see, that's our teapot key. Replace that. And I won't bore you and make you watch the rest of these, but I'll render them out and then we'll go back over to Fusion. Alright, I've finished rendering the lighting passes for the environments, but I have not done the shadow passes yet because they're actually going to be done a little bit differently. So what we need to do is I'm going to turn the teapot back on. We're going to make him well, he's still invisible to camera, so make sure invisible to camera, and we're going to put the map material on the environment. We want shadows again. Now let me render this and I'll show you what the problem is that we're going to have to fix. If we look at the shadow pass, we've got the shadow of the environment and the shadow of the teapot together, which we don't want. We want just the shadow of the teapot. Now the way to fix that is to change the properties of the environment so that the environment does not cast shadows, but it still receives shadows. So we're going to turn this off and we'll render again. We look at the alpha, and there we go. Now we have the correct shadow pass for the key light. So we'll just save that out. That was the T shadow, and just do the exact same setup for the skylight, which again I won't make you watch. Alright, that has finished, and here's the shadow of just the teapot on the environment from the skylight. So update that pass, jump back into Fusion, and if we just reload all of these, there you go. Everything comes in the way it should be. Alright, one thing I would like to point out with this is Um, we've got these shadow passes that we're putting on that we're not doing anything to. Let's say this is the look we want for our final render. We've decided to split it up into passes, and we've rendered these passes. We're not doing anything to them. We're just combining everything back together again, so that it comes out looking like, you know, well, not that one, but the render straight out of Max. So if we're not doing anything with these in the comp, why render them? You know, we could probably create this just by taking the teapot and making it invisible to camera, and then we only have one pass. And the same goes for this. If the teapot was invisible to camera, then we could render the key pass of the environment and get this. And it's true that if we did that, this would go back together exactly right. There'd be no problem. The reason why you might not want to do that is sometimes when your environments and your characters and scenes and everything are getting really complex, the render times start to become a problem. Now, it seems like if you had rendered these together, you're saving time, because otherwise you'd have to render twice. But that may not be the case. Shadow passes just by themselves sometimes, or often really, render faster than if you had done an entire ambient pass again of the environment. You know, so that's going to actually slow you down even more. So it's, even though you've got more passes to deal with, it's often better, because these passes usually render faster, and then the environment is completely isolated and the character is completely isolated. So you don't have to, like, if let's say the animation of this teapot changed after I had rendered everything, you know, I could just do these teapot passes again and the shadow passes, which are quick, instead of re-rendering all the environments passes over again as well. So, you know, just keep that in mind. It tends to be better to split these out and keep them separate, even though it does create a little bit of extra work in the comp for you. Okay, I've jumped back over to Max, and I want to just show you one more thing which you should be careful of. I've deleted the box, I've turned the lights and everything back on, made everything visible again. Let me just make sure. Okay, cast shadows. One thing you shouldn't do, if you can avoid it, and often you can, is to render your environment passes like this. Let me just go ahead and render that and show you what I mean. I want those off. Okay, this is the sort of thing you're going to want to try to avoid doing. What I've done here is I put the matte material on the teapot while rendering my environment pass. And if we look at the alpha, it's cut that hole out. Now, you may think it's not a problem because you're just going to put the teapot back on top of this. So let me just save this out. Okay, and I'll load that in. Alright, I'm just going to disconnect this. This is our teapot passes here. Shoot, I need to re-render those. Hold on a second. Alright, excuse me, I had to jump back there and fix one of my mistakes. So I've rendered another beauty pass, which is just the teapot now. So we're just going to deal with these two for a second. So what we'll do is I'm going to merge this together and take a look at what happened. Alright, see, we're getting this halo around the edge. Now, the reason that that's happening is because if we look at the alpha channel, remember, just like before, we've got these values that are gray in the alpha, which means they're partially transparent. And what we're seeing is through to the background color, which is black. So when we put this on top, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the black. We're seeing straight through to the background. Now just to make sure that that's really clear, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the background color. So to do that, I'm going to rearrange this stuff here. Okay, so now we've got background color. Here is our background pass and our teapot pass. Now let's say I change the color of the background. If we zoom in, now you can see we're getting different colors on the edge. That's just because we're seeing through to the background now. So if you can avoid it, do try and avoid that. Alright, so what do you do if you're stuck in a situation where you don't have time to go back, fix your passes, or that they're just, you need to render your passes this way? How do you fix this problem? Well, it is possible. It gets a little ugly, and that's why it's really better if you can to fix it in your 3D package. But it is possible to fix, and here's how you do it. Alright, we gotta figure out what the problem is exactly, and it becomes real obvious if we look at the alpha channel of these two passes being combined. Alright, because they were cut out from each other, when you merge them together, you get these values in between, where this gray value, and that means it's transparent and it's letting the background color show through. So if we look at these passes individually and we get real close in here and take a look at this, watch when I switch back and forth between them. These gray values are basically the opposite of each other. What's 50% gray in this one is also 50% gray in this one. What's 25% here is 70% there. And so it is possible to combine these back together. What we need to do is do an additive blend of these two alpha channels to create a background, or create an alpha that doesn't have this gray. So to do that, we're going to use the channel Boolean. And this tool is really great. It allows you to do all sorts of stuff. You can take certain channels and just shift them around. Like if I wanted the red channel to be the blue channel, I'd just switch this and choose blue. But what we're going to do is some math. So we have operation here, and instead of copy, we're going to add. And what we'll do is we'll combine these two together. And when we do that, the alpha of the two passes are being added together, and there we go, we've solved our problem. And if I zoom out, alright, see, we no longer have this ugliness. It's gone when we combine it this way. So this is good. We'll use this later on, but that alone is not going to solve the problem. What we need to do is solve the problem of pre-multiplication. Now, remember when we're saving out our targets earlier, we checked that little checkbox that said pre-multiply alpha? Well, that's come back to haunt us here. Now really, I should point out that pre-multiplying your alpha is the way you really want to handle this stuff. When you render your passes out, it's always best to have them pre-multiplied. Unless you want to deal with that in the comp. It's an extra step, but some people like to do it that way. Not all passes can you get away with having straight alphas, is what it's called. When you don't pre-multiply, it's called a straight alpha. Not all passes work properly that way, so it's best to have it pre-multiplied, and if you need to unpre-multiply it, it's a terrible term, but it's unfortunately the best way to describe it, you can do that in the comp. It just gets a little ugly, which you're going to see here. But what does pre-multiplying do? Basically, let's pretend the teapot wasn't in here and we had just this blue background over everything. What happens is the alpha channel is this white color here, black here, just like if you were to multiply this on top of an all blue background, this is the result you would expect to get. You get black where the black is, and where white is, it does nothing. And the values in between, it just kind of makes this little gradient towards black. Now, that's exactly what pre-multiplying is doing to the RGB channels. It's darkening them, and then as the last step, what it does is it saves out the alpha channel. It just punches the hole right through the RGB, creating the alpha. So that's pre-multiplying. But what we need to do is restore this to its unpre-multiplied state. And in order to do that, we're going to use the Boolean again. We'll connect it up. And this time what we're going to do is, instead of multiplying, we need to do the opposite. So we're going to divide this time. So we'll set the operation to divide. And we're not dividing by the RGB, we're dividing by the alpha. So we'll switch this to alpha for each of the RGB channels. And for the alpha, we're going to do nothing for right now. Okay, so look what happened. If we go back, all those areas that were in between values that weren't blue, they were starting to go towards the black, have been restored to their original blue color. We get this ugly jagged edge, but that's actually not a problem. So I'll show you what happens. I'm going to bring a matte control down here just because it has this option right here, post multiply. So this is the straight alpha version, and then if we turn on post multiply, we get the original image back. So here's the original image. Here it is after we've divided it and multiplied it again, giving us the exact same result. So, alright, perfect. We're on the right track. We've restored these edges, so at least now the right color is showing up there. And what we need to do is actually get this into our alpha. Alright, so here we're dividing stuff, so we can't connect it there. What we need to do is bring another Boolean in, and in this case we'll connect this node into our channel Boolean, and we're going to copy, but the RGB we don't want to change at all, so that needs to go to do nothing, and the alpha is going to be the foreground alpha. So if we look at the alpha channel now, okay, we've put this guy's alpha into this pass now. So the RGB has our unpre-multiplied edges, but the alpha channel has the combination of these two. See how complicated this gets? You'd rather avoid this. And now when we put this over, we get this white back here, and that's what happens in Digital Fusion when you divide by 0. Wherever it was black and we divided it, it just becomes white. So we need to get rid of that, and to do that we just bring this guy in, the matte control, and post multiply, and that's giving us our background showing through. So, and here we still have our nice edges, our unpre-multiplied edges with the white, which doesn't matter because we're covering it up. And there we go. We've gotten rid of the problem. Everything merges in perfectly, and this is actually identical to the results that you would get if you had rendered this together. So we solved the problem, and look what an ugly mess it is, and it's fairly complicated, and you need to know what you're doing here. So it's really best, if you can help it, to not have to go through this and just set up your passes out of max correctly to begin with.